Good afternoon. My name is Chris Cuban, and I'm the president of the St. Louis chapter of the Public Relations Society of America. We want to welcome you to our chapter webinar series. We've been doing this every week for the last 2 months, and we plan to do it for the next couple months. So we want to welcome you to this very timely topic of race relations in America and why we're not okay. A lot of us in PRSA know that a good part of being a member, or a good benefit of being a member, is building relationships with others. And I'm going to introduce Tru Pettigrew here in a minute, but I met Tru. He gave a keynote presentation last year in St. Petersburg, Florida at the Counselors Academy conference, and made such an impression on everyone that attended that I wanted to make sure that we started the dialogue, or the conversation on race relations. And I wanted Tru to be able to give this presentation because he's such a dynamic speaker and is amazing to get us all start talking. He's a celebrated author, an engaging speaker, and a committed community leader. He is an award-winning marketing executive with close to 20 years experience working with some incredible brands such as Nike and State Farm, Heineken, Hennessy, Unilever, and Ford, just to name some. But he's also consulted for police departments across the entire country. He's also consulted for the International Association of Chiefs of Police and has really done amazing work after Ferguson. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Tru Pettigrew.
But it all changed for me in 2014, in August of 2014, to be exact, when Ferguson happened. And many of you, if not all of you, remember what happened in Ferguson, Missouri on Saturday, August 9th, 2014. It was the day that Officer Darren Wilson shot and killed Michael Brown. And so that affected me on a personal level. And we had seen many other incidents between law enforcement and Black males taking place across the country on your news feeds, on your social media feeds. This one was different for me and for many, as we see the impact that it had on the profession of law enforcement and introducing more intentional community policing initiatives. But why it affected me in the way that it did was largely because of my own personal life experiences. Growing up in Baltimore, being on the receiving end of excessive force because of where I grew up in Baltimore, there was a lot of crime, violence, and things that took place that I guess the officers that policed the community in which I live felt the need to police in a very heavy-handed way, regardless of whether you were engaged or involved in criminal activity or not. They treated me and my friends the same way as they treated those that were actually involved and engaged in that activity. And so growing up, being on the receiving end of excessive force by those particular officers in the community where I grew up really began to form my perception of law enforcement. And so as I began to kind of matriculate through life, go to college, graduate, move away, spending time in LA, similar incidents occurred in my life experience in LA, where one that I remember very clearly, coming out of a convenience store. I lived in the Crenshaw district when I moved to LA. So coming out of a convenience store one day, a bunch of police cars pulled up, and one of the officers ran up to me and grabbed me, and they came out, they were yelling, they were screaming, and I'm looking around trying to figure out who they're yelling and screaming at because I hadn't done anything, and nothing actually had occurred, didn't appear to be. One of the officers grabbed me, he throws me to the ground, he's got my face pressed against the blacktop of the parking lot, his knees in my back, he had pulled his weapon, had it pressed against the side of my head, and he said to me, "Give me a reason, please, I wish you would, just give me a reason." Essentially enticing me to give him a reason to take my life is the way that I understood that. And so I ended up getting taken down to the police department. And fortunately for me, I was released because they found the guy that they were looking for. There was a robbery at a nearby 7-Eleven, which I was coming out of a 7-Eleven, and they were responding to that call. It wasn't the 7-Eleven that where I was coming from, but it was a case of mistaken identity. Apparently, I fit the description of the guy that they were looking for. And I do understand that that can happen, but the manner in which I was treated during that entire process, no direction or instruction or explanation as to why I was thrown to the ground, gun pressed against the side of my head, and this officer basically taunting me, letting me know that he wants to take my life. And then even when I was released, the officer tossed my driver's license to me, and it was still a Maryland driver's license with my Baltimore address. And his words to me were, "This isn't be more. Now you need to get out of here and be more careful." And those words still ring in my head to this day. So I say all that to say that that formed my opinion of law enforcement, and particularly white male police officers, because whenever any of those incidents took place, it was at the hands of a white male police officer for me in my life. So most of my adult life, if not all of my adult life, I did not like and I did not trust police, particularly white male police officers, based on my life experience. So when the incident took place in 2014 with Michael Brown, I had a son then. And I didn't have a son when all those other things took place. So I had normalized it that that's just the way that life is. And I figured I could just take care of myself with no issues. But it changes things. And for any of you out there that are parents, you understand that it changes things when you're responsible for another life. So living in Cary, North Carolina, where I live, in a predominantly white and relatively affluent community, I was very concerned about how I was going to protect my son from these things happening to him, the things that I'm seeing on my social media feed over and over, in news cycles over and over, things that I know that had happened to me and it happened to people that look like me. Fortunately for me, my incident did not end in a fatality, but I was concerned for how am I going to protect my son from these things happening to him. So I went down to my local police department and had a conversation and started a conversation. And that conversation led to a relationship with the police chief of that department. And that led to us working together in a way to help build bridges of trust and legitimacy between my local law enforcement and the Black community where I live. And I'm so grateful for, because of the officer that I met with the day that I walked through those doors. He actually took the time to listen to me. He took the time to hear me, to hear what I had to say. And those are principles that I leverage and utilize in the work that I do with community bridge building across the country every day. And it's really based on listening to understand and not just listening to reply. And so we've seen tremendous outcomes from the work that we've been doing, and the work that we started in Cary has then spread to the neighboring municipalities and communities, and start doing that bridge building work with Apex, North Carolina, Morrisville, Fayetteville, Fuquay-Varina, Raleigh, and so forth and so on, to the point where it led to a relationship with the IACP, which is the International Association of Chiefs of Police, where I now serve as a subject matter expert for helping them to build bridges of trust and legitimacy with law enforcement agencies and departments across the country. And when I look at what's happening today across the country with all of the racial discord and the racial tension, people are not okay. And the reason that we're not okay is because we have never talked about race in this country. It is a very difficult and uncomfortable conversation to have, I get it. But until we are willing to talk about race and stop avoiding the conversation simply because it's uncomfortable and inconvenient, we will continue to have to deal with these issues of racism, racial discrimination, and racial inequities and racial discord within our society. We need to make the time to engage in this difficult conversation if we truly want to resolve it and reconcile it and allow some healing to take place. And this is particularly important for you all in your profession, in your industry, as public relations and communications experts. I know for certain all of the organizations and companies that you represent are struggling to some degree, trying to figure out how they can effectively have this conversation about race, because we are at a point, we've reached a tipping point where we can no longer avoid the conversation about race in America. And I am not going to sit here and proclaim that I have spoken to every Black and brown person in America, but I'm pretty confident that they are not okay. The Black and brown people that you know, if you are not a Black and brown person, so to all of my white brothers and sisters right now, and I can't see any of you, so I don't know what the makeup is of those that are participating on this session. But let me be clear, for my white brothers and sisters, your Black and brown family, friends, and colleagues are not okay, and they have not been okay for some time. We've just reached a tipping point where they can't take it anymore, because these incidents of feeling oppressed and marginalized and disregarded and undervalued have been happening to them all of their lives. And what's happening in your organizations when incidents take place, like a Michael Brown, or like an Ahmaud Arbery, or like a George Floyd, or like a Walter Scott, or like a Philando Castile, or like a Breonna Taylor, and you show up at work the next day, and you all are working side by side, your Black and brown colleagues are tearing up inside. They are struggling. It's traumatic. When you see these images over and over again, you project that to be yourself. You see yourself in that image, and it is traumatic, but it's also untreated and unresolved trauma that manifests itself in different ways, ways that we won't even and don't even understand that it will manifest itself. And when we walk into work, or when they walk into work and you don't seem bothered, they feel like you don't care. And then that begins to create a slight wedge in that relationship of comfort, that relationship of trust, that relationship of familiarity. It starts to create a wedge in that relationship, even though it may not be the reality. They have filled in the blanks in the narrative of wondering whether you care or not by making the assumption that you don't care, because you can seemingly move on throughout the course of your day with ease, while they are torn up inside, can barely focus and can barely function. So if you haven't checked on your Black and brown family, friends, and colleagues, I would encourage you to do so, because they are not okay. And it makes them feel distant from you if you are seemingly okay. That's why it's important that we talk about it, because the reality is you're just as outraged, you're just as bothered, you're just as frustrated, you're just as confused as your Black and brown colleagues. But you don't talk about it, so they don't know that. And when we are open to having the conversation and willing to be transparent and vulnerable with one another and talk about how we feel, but not just how these things make us feel, why we feel the way that we do, then that will allow us to strengthen our empathy. So once you know how I feel, and once you know why I feel that way, now you're able to be more empathetic. And once you share with me how you feel and why you feel that way, now I can develop levels of empathy for you as well. And now that I'm not wondering whether or not you're okay with this, now that I know you're not okay with this, it creates the space for us to feel more connected, more of an emotional connection, and restore that level of trust and understanding, and realize that we want the same thing. We're on the same page. No, it may not affect you and impact you in the same way that it does me, but now that I know it does bother and impact you, now we can be on the same page and have the right headspace to figure out, okay, now how can we come together to come up with thoughts, ideas, and solutions for how we can address this and better coexist and move forward? How can we co-create and collaborate on solutions that can create the most inclusive environment where we all feel as though we can thrive, where we can all show up as our full and authentic selves and not have to walk around on eggshells, because now we have cleared the air in that tension. And now you understand that my daily life includes things like me going for a run and having to put a armband on my arm instead of carrying my phone in my hand, my wife having to purchase me an armband because she's concerned that someone may think I have a gun in my hand while I'm running and something bad happens to me and I never come home. My wife should not have to think like that. Whether or not, if I'm at a hotel, at a business meeting, and I'm coming back up from dinner in the hotel one night and the elevator door opens and there's an elderly white couple in the elevator, that I actually have to take time to process and think about whether or not I should get in the elevator because I don't want to make them uncomfortable. Or if I'm walking down the street and it's a late evening and there's a white couple on one side of the street and I'm walking faster than them and I'm coming up behind them, I'm thinking, well, should I cross the street? Should I slow down? I don't want to make them uncomfortable. If I go to a retailer and I'm being followed around, a nice retailer, and I know I'm being followed around, now I'm processing in my mind, while I feel disrespected, I feel disregarded, but I know if I go somewhere else at this point, it's going to take me a half hour, 45 minutes out of my way, and I need to get the things that I'm here for. Now I have to struggle with the cognitive dissonance and internal struggle of patronizing this retailer, giving them my money, although they are treating me the way that they are treating me, without any words even being spoken. These are the struggles and the weight that your Black and brown brothers and sisters carry every day. And when they carry these traumas and this weight and they show up in the workplace, they're not able to operate at their full potential. And then that hurts the organization. Because if any single one body part, and if we're on a team together, we're in an organization together, we're in this same country together, we're all different body parts of the same body. So if one part of the body is hurting and is in pain, then it will affect the performance of the entire body. And we need to understand that. We need to take an interest that if one part of our body is in pain and is hurting and is dysfunctioning in any way, it's dysfunctional in any way, we need to tend to that body part to make sure it's whole. So it's important that we have the conversation about race for the benefit of us all, for the greater good of all. And how I propose you engaging in that conversation is not just jumping straight to solutions, which is what we're often inclined to do. And I applaud that. I commend that because I understand that we want to do something. We want to just make sure that we're putting some action plans together. And I get it. That's our tendency. But we can't cheat the process. And the process that I want to offer you today is when you start engaging in these courageous conversations, start with the heart, because this is a heart issue. This is a heart issue within people in across every industry. It's not just a law enforcement issue. It's not just a Black community issue. This is a societal issue that affects and impacts us all, and it's a heart issue. So when you have these conversations, I encourage you to have facilitated dialogue that encourages people to share their hearts, how they feel and why they feel the way that they feel, so that we can exercise and develop our empathy for one another. And there are three types of empathy. There is cognitive empathy, where I can understand why you think the way that you do, because I see the things that have happened to you. Then there's emotional empathy, where not only do I see your hurt, but now I can feel and share in your pain. right? That's the emotional empathy, the level of emotional empathy that we need to transition to from simply just cognitive empathy. But then there is compassionate empathy, a willingness and an ability to show compassion to other people's situations. And it's the compassionate empathy that compels us to take action. And so that's why it's important that we share our hearts with one another, so that across whatever racial divide may potentially exist, so that my Black and brown brothers and sisters can understand that this is no condemnation or no indictment on our white brothers and sisters in any manner whatsoever. It's about helping to educate them with the insights, perspectives, and tools to be the best ally that they can be, because no one of them did this. They didn't create the societal conditions that we live in. So we want to embrace them and empower them and welcome them. This should not be a condemnation or an indictment on them, but encourage them to share their feelings. And now that can help put us in a place where we're better connected to co-create these thoughts, ideas, and solutions, and leverage the collective life experiences and leverage the collective intelligence that we share to create cultures and climates of inclusion. Then we go from the heart to the head. Now that we have placed ourselves in a safe space of trust and legitimacy with one another, now we can talk about the ideas and solutions and thoughts that we can develop, overarching strategies that we can develop to ensure that there is no semblance of racism, racial discrimination, or racial inequities within the environment that we've created whatsoever, and understand what that looks like, what that feels like for all parties to thrive. And then we get to the hands, the action. Then we put our hands to the plow. Now, what action steps are we going to hold ourselves accountable to take as an organization and as individuals, and develop smart action steps, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, that we can hold the organization to, but we can also take personal responsibility for, with the small things that we each can do on a daily basis, because it's doing the little things consistently over time that leads to the great things. So holding each other accountable, articulating what those smart action steps we want to be for the at an organizational level and at a personal level. And then we can hold each other accountable. So creating an ongoing system of dialogue and information exchange so that we can empower one another to be the absolute best versions of ourselves. Because my experience has taught me, in working with law enforcement, consulting with law enforcement, but corporations and organizations all over the world, across the world, is that a lot of these microaggressions and these incidents of disregard and offense are not all rooted in malicious intent. Most are rooted in ignorance, just lack of knowledge and lack of understanding, simply because we do not talk. And it's so easy to be dismissive of someone else's life experiences or someone else's reality if it is not your own. We need to talk about it. And then once we've been able to do that, now we can gain a level of understanding and realize that there is so much more that connects us and ties us together than we should allow to separate us. And truly listen to understand, not listen to reply. And so it's out of ignorance, and the solution to ignorance is education. It's not condemnation, it's not discipline. The solution to ignorance is education. Now, the solution to mistakes, and we will all make mistakes even once we've been educated, because we've been conditioned to see the world through a certain lens for so long. We may still make mistakes, but the solution to mistakes is correction. And now the solution to misconduct, when it is blatant and clear malicious intent and misconduct, then that requires discipline. But we can't jump straight to discipline and condemnation when someone is operating out of ignorance. And now I'll say this to my Black brothers and sisters, and I've heard this before, well, Tru, it's not my responsibility to educate my white colleagues and counterparts. And I hear you, and I agree that it is not your responsibility. But I also know that if we do not take the time to educate when the opportunity presents itself, we can expect the same behavior to continue to occur over and over. And so when we do take the opportunity and the time to educate, we help to affect and impact change behavior. And I know it can be tiring, and I know it can be exhausting, but I would just encourage you, just do not grow weary of doing good works, of doing the right thing, because eventually you will reap that harvest as long as you do not give up. But we need to support one another and be courageous, which is why I call them courageous conversations. And the interesting thing about courage is courage more often than not comes from an outside force or an outside source. And we tell people to be courageous, but it's not easily drawn from within. Courage usually comes from the knowledge that we have people around us that will show us love and support. That enables and empowers us to be courageous. So I encourage you all to engage in these courageous conversations for yourselves and even for your clients and your partners, because they're struggling. And I can tell you right now, your Black and brown colleagues, family, and friends, and your organizations and the organizations of the clients that you serve are not okay. But we all have the ability and responsibility to make sure that we're all okay, because we're all in this together. And I want to take the opportunity right now to open up the floor for any comments or questions, because I think it's important, as I talked about sharing your heart before we get to the head and the hands. I want to give the opportunity for any of you through the chat section, through the chat section, to share your heart, even if it's a comment of how you feel right now, how this climate is making you feel. It's important that you do that to release that, to get that release. Otherwise, it becomes untreated trauma for you. And you never know how that will manifest itself. So thank you all for allowing me to be with you today. Thank you all for allowing me to share with you today. And I will look at the comments in the chat. And Chris, if you could help me out.
Absolutely. And Jeremy Elwood just posed a question, and I'm going to bring him on here because he's the president of the Springfield, Missouri chapter. And Jeremy, do you want to go live and ask your question live instead of being on the chat? Go right ahead if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. Tru, first of all, thank you so much for joining us for this today. It's amazing to have you here. And my question deals with kind of the defensiveness that sometimes can come up when you're having these conversations with people, maybe people who may not be as aware of what others are going through. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you maybe help people get past that defensiveness, or maybe bring down those barriers to tapping into their empathy or their compassion.
Yeah, to approach that conversation with an open mind and an open heart. And going back to what I said before, is a willingness to listen, to understand. Now, the person sharing information, I'll say for that person as well, to not approach it in a judgmental or an accusatory tone, because just human nature, will all get defensive. But allow people to share their life experiences with you, to share their perspectives and realities with you. And let's not be so quick to be dismissive of other people's experiences simply because they're not yours. I've had a lot of my white colleagues, when I say, it's frustrating to get followed around these stores and these retailers sometimes, and they're like, oh, come on, like, you sure you're not just making that up? It's because it's so hard for them to believe, because they see me and they know me for the person that I am, and it's never happened to them. So it seems rather far-fetched to them, but it's offensive and it's hurtful when you're dismissive of someone else's experiences simply because you haven't shared in that experience. And then that discourages them from a willingness to be open and sharing with you moving forward. So I would strongly suggest that you approach those conversations with an open mind and an open heart. And for the person that's sharing, instead of always calling people out for any of their microaggressions or lack of knowledge or lack of understanding, call them in. Instead of calling them out, call them into a conversation and approach the conversation with empathy as you share your own hearts and your own life experiences. And I hope that answered your question, Jeremy.
All right, Anita has made a couple comments, and Anita, I've made you live if you're willing to say a few words.
Hi there, and thank you so very much, Tru. I was a part of a conversation with PRSA for the last couple of weeks, and we had over 1,000 people on the call, which just says we are hungry for communication. We're hungry for just being able to express ourselves. But so my comment was about the stress. I have been in the workforce for over 40 years. And I still tense up when I drive by a police car. Mm-hmm. I have 2 Black sons, one who jogs often. I sit on the front porch and wait for him to come back. Mm-hmm. And I have gone through the civil rights era. I have gone through all of this. And I'm just really now realizing how this stress has affected me for so many years. Yeah. I've had to hold back and not say things or walk away, and not be concerned about my colleagues seeing me as the angry Black woman. And, having close relationships with the few Black people who are in the workplace where we may go off in a little corner and just hold each other's hand, make sure that we don't fall off of a cliff. Yeah. So it is this constant stress. And I guess, I don't know, it's like I'm trying to figure out now how to deal with it and stop trying to be the superwoman. Mm-hmm. So I just want to thank you for what you're saying, because you hit it. Thanks for saying we are not okay. I am not okay.
We aren't and have not been for some time. And thank you for your willingness to be open and transparent. And what I would say to you is to not continue to carry that burden alone. There is so much power in inclusion. And there's so many of our white colleagues who want to be involved as a part of the solution, but don't know how. And I would suggest that we are no longer silent. And I know we talk about how silence is complicit when our white counterparts see something and they just don't do anything or say anything. And I'm sharing with my Black brothers and sisters that when we feel the way that we feel, we hear these things, we see these things, and because we feel tired and fatigued of our commentary falling on deaf ears, we do not want to be perceived as the angry Black woman or the disgruntled Black male. So we don't say anything. We can no longer be complicit in our silence by not saying anything as well, because then we're saying it's okay as well.
All right, I'm going to go to Kelly Drinkwine. Kelly, you want to say a couple quick comments?
Oh, thanks, Chris. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, great. Thank you so much for organizing today's event. It's been really, really remarkable, and I appreciate it. One question and kind of continued challenge and opportunity has been when I hear people want to shift the focus from Black Lives Matter to All Lives Matter. And, knowing, at least hoping that all of this is with the right intention, but really trying to help them refocus their energy back to Black Lives Matter, because that's where it needs to be. And Ty, I was just wondering if you had any suggested talking points to help support those conversations. Because, I'm a firm believer and supporter in that regard, and I know I could benefit from additional insight and guidance there.
No, thank you for that question and comment, Kelly. And my response to that is, we all realize all lives matter. And why does a certain segment of the population feel so compelled to profess and proclaim that Black Lives Matter? To me, purpose is so powerful, and having clarity of purpose. So the question I would ask is, well, why do you feel it necessary to proclaim Black Lives Matter? It should be self-evident. And so then, as you peel back those layers, for an entire nation of a population of a people group to profess that and proclaim that, and there wasn't this universal Black people meeting that just took place. This has been something that has been felt for generations. And so then the question becomes, okay, in this country, was there ever a time when Black lives did not matter? So let's start there. And if we look at, what was it, 1619, when the first slave ships hit the shores of Jamestown, Virginia, this was chattel slavery. I think it's obvious for us all that Black lives did not matter to the dominant majority in this country at that time. And so let's fast forward to the Juneteenth, when the slaves were freed. So, right, and we just celebrated Juneteenth. So after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, did the hearts and minds of the dominant majority in this country all of a sudden decide, because that document was signed, that, okay, well, Black Lives Matter now? And we could probably suggest that there was a no to that, because there was still a need for Reconstruction. And so after we've gone through the Reconstruction period of about 1877 to maybe 1830 something, 1877, then we had to go into the Jim Crow era. So that should let us know, okay, so Black lives still didn't matter because we went through the Jim Crow era from 1877 to the late 1890s. So after the Jim Crow era ended, did the next day that Black lives begin to matter in the hearts and minds of the dominant majority in this country? I would suggest not, because there was still the civil rights movement in the 60s when Black people were fighting, mind you, for civil rights, to be treated with civility, not even equal. So there was a fight in the 60s. And so once the Civil Rights Act was passed, did the hearts and minds of the dominant majority in this country all of a sudden change to universally agree that Black lives mattered? I don't know if there is a date that we can identify in our country's history when that was the case. And absolutely all lives matter, but I believe Black people feel compelled to proclaim that, because it doesn't feel like this country has ever believed that.
So Tru, we have a couple other people that want to say a few words, so I'm going to turn it over to Ken Jacobs.
It really breaks my heart that people have to have the conversation with their children, the talk, especially their sons. It's heartbreaking and it's wrong. And, I grew up, I was a kid during the height of the civil rights movement, but, we watched the news every night, read Life magazine and what have you. And I just never thought I'd see this still going on in my lifetime. And, I think if there actually is some good coming from all of this, which is the increased dialogue. And I think people of all colors saying, no more, this has got to change.
No, thank you for that, Ken. And I hope that is the case, and I believe that we are where we are. To the point that you made, you can't believe this is still where we are. And I would suggest that we're still in this place because we have yet to have honest and open dialogue about the issues of race in America. So let's please talk about it.
Thank you, Tru, for this presentation. It's been really informative. I'm really curious about responding to Black colleagues and friends when they're sharing their stories, it feels strange to respond with "I'm sorry," not because I'm not sorry, but because it just feels like there must be a better, more healing or helpful response. And as a white person, I really can't empathize with that lived experience because that will never be my lived experience, but I do still want to respond from a place of empathy. Can you speak to what a more helpful or healing response might be to those stories and experiences?
Aaron, you just said it. That's why it's important to share our hearts. People can feel and sense your heart and the genuineness and the authenticity of when you are truly speaking from the heart. They can feel that compassion. They can feel that sympathy. And the more you are willing to share yours as well, when allowing them to share theirs, that empathy will be developed. And you don't have to have all the answers, and you won't. But saying to someone, hey, I don't even know how to respond to that. It makes me feel this way. It makes me feel bad. I'm very confused. I'm frustrated. I am sorry that those things happened. I know I didn't do it, but I can't reconcile my feelings. All I know is I want to figure out how to prevent this from continuing to happen. You don't have all the answers. No one of us has all the answers, but it's important that we start with our heart and guard our hearts from any malice, contempt, and hate and fear, because it's the things of the heart that truly dictate the course of our lives. So allow our hearts to be filled with compassion and love and empathy, so that those can be the things that dictate the course of our lives. So, but thank you for sharing, but sharing your heart is where you want to start.
All right, we have Charlene next.
Okay. I have had two coworkers. I work for the government, and I've had two coworkers who came to me perplexed, not understanding how to deal with the community, and this was a part of their job. What I did was set them down, and I went through history. I provided them with resources and tools and examples, and then scheduled another meeting. They came back with their eyes, first of all, wide open. They had no idea about the Harlem Renaissance, about Birth of a Nation, its impact, about the trust or the lack thereof, about anything ranging from the way we traveled to the fact that majority of the individuals that have lynched African Americans are still alive and have yet been prosecuted. And when they came back for that second meeting, they had that look, that aha moment that explained, okay, you didn't just get here. I always tell people, it can take a day to destroy your career, but it can take a lifetime to get it back. Mm-hmm. So they sat here and they became hungry. They wanted to know more. Good. And then as we went through the details, they became like these champions. This individual has a major job at my company. And she told me that in the African American community, she felt more respected, more received. And she said and the community said to her, "Where have you been? Thank you for hearing our voice." And as a result, it became this great success communication strategy. The other individual is a part of planning, and he has become this champion. Is really kind of funny. He's constantly sharing information with me as if I don't know. But the point is, he's reaching out to me and he's like, "You got to read this." And his spouse is a teacher. And so between the two of them, they're beginning to see, and his spouse teaches in the public school system, they're beginning to see the Black culture from a historical perspective, to understand, oh, that's how we got here. To understand, oh, when Europeans came here, they were given property. They just put a stake in the ground and said it was theirs. Mm-hmm. So that was that competitive edge. We never had that opportunity. And so I think, to me, what works best for me when it comes to communicating is is that you sit down, you have the rational conversation, you look at it from a logistical perspective, from an intellectual perspective, provide them with the tools and resources. And if it really matters, they will come back to you. That's all.
No, thank you, Sherlyn, for sharing that. And again, knowledge is so powerful, and it's not always from a place of malicious intent. And the answer and the solution to ignorance is education. To lack of knowledge is education. And wisdom is the principal thing. And we should seek wisdom, learn to do good. But in all of our getting, also get an understanding so that we can have comprehension of why these things are issues. So thank you for that, Sherlyn.
All right, Jeremy has a follow-up question. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, Tru. I'm curious. Just kind of watching, what's going on in the current environment. Just this may be my kind of natural positivity speaking, but it seems like there's more. It seems like there's more potential for kind of positive momentum than there has been in the past when there's been protests and unrest going on in the public. And I wonder if you feel like this is different than what has happened in the past.
I do. And I'll say this, I've been working with law enforcement for the last 7 years. And this recent climate that we're in, these series of events that we've all just witnessed and experienced, I've seen more members of law enforcement publicly share their disappointment, their disapproval, their condemnation of the acts of Officer Chauvin and his colleagues publicly on their own social media. I have never seen it to this degree, where it does feel like, unfortunately, this tragic event has created a movement of solidarity that I have never seen before when in past incidents like this. So I'm inclined to agree.
All right, Nez, you're next.
Yes.
Hi, so I'm Nez Savala, and I'm from the St. Louis chapter. And so, Mr. Pettigrew, I want to thank you for mentioning and speaking of Michael Brown and Darren Wilson. That happened in 2014 in the community where I now live. I live in Ferguson. At the time, I lived on the in another part of town, but I've lived in St. Louis since 2005. And not to be critical of my PR colleagues in the St. Louis area, but after a while, to me, it felt like we missed an opportunity to support a municipality that needed help. I used to work for the city of Ferguson as their PR person a long time ago. And when Michael Brown was killed, they didn't have anybody on staff and they needed help. And the city manager reached out to me for help. I, at the time, felt like that wasn't something that I could do, but I asked some other colleagues who had agencies or who I felt maybe had more capacity than I could, and nobody wanted to touch it for whatever reason. And our chapter came and we talked about it about a year later at a panel about diversity, inclusion, equity, and how we can be of support. The one agency that did step in, Common Ground PR, they stepped in to do what they could and they got vilified for it. And so that to me was painful because those people are my friends and I contacted them to help the city of Ferguson. So I want to start with that you recognize Michael Brown and also Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and all of the others whose names we don't know or we knew and we forgot. It's important. And the other thing I want to follow up on is what you mentioned, that we're not okay and to check on us. And that is a nice gesture, but if you're going to check on somebody, please be sincere and please check to understand, listen to understand. Don't ask me how I'm supposed to fix it for you because I don't know how to fix it for myself. Legislation doesn't change hearts and minds. And so you have a good point also about leading with your heart and with your mind. But I just want to implore you, if you really want to ask how someone of color is doing in this climate, make sure you go in with sincerity and make sure really that you don't want to just talk about your own, how you, there has to be more than how are you doing? Well, this happened to me, because I don't think that should be the tone of the conversation. And I feel like I might be rambling, but I thank you. I'm just going to stop right there. Thank you.
Thank you, Nez, and thank you for bringing that up. Please be sincere in your outreach and your engagements, because it can do much more harm than good if it's not coming from a place of authenticity and sincerity. And I'll also say to you, Nez, if you don't know Chief Jason Armstrong, who's the current police chief of Ferguson, I'd be happy to introduce you to him. If you don't, Chris can connect us with and share my contact information. Really, really, really good man with a heart to serve all, and a heart of reconciliation. So Chief Jason Armstrong, you should get to know him if you don't already. Thank you. Thank you for that, Wendy. And that's a lot, but now, so to answer your question is advising your clients and companies on how to engage in this conversation, when and how. They should have been having this conversation, or it started. And if they haven't, start now. And I strongly suggest the process that I shared earlier. Start with heart sessions, allowing their employees, all employees, not just Black, not just, allowing them to come together and share their hearts with each other so that people can understand how they feel. And then allow those members to come up with thoughts and ideas that the organization can leverage and benefit from. Won't be able to do them all, but leverage the collective intelligence and experiences of the employees for what they believe is best. And then hold yourselves accountable by delivering realistic, that's why it has to be smart, specific, measurable, attainable, right, and relevant, realistic action steps. My concern with a lot of the statements that I'm seeing from a lot of companies right now, they were just quick to react. They were much more reflexive than reflective. It was just a knee-jerk reflexive reaction, and they didn't truly reflect on the real hurt, pain, needs, attitudes, drivers, and influencers of their audiences internally and externally. So that conversation needs to be had, and I would prioritize it by having that conversation internally to make sure your house is in order, and then get insight and perspective on how to translate that externally.
We really want to thank you, Tru. Again, your book's available on Amazon. We do have a couple more questions, but I do want to give a shout out to some of the other chapters that are involved in this webinar series project. It's the St. Louis chapter of PRSA, the Kansas City chapter, the Springfield, Missouri chapter, Southeast Wisconsin, Nebraska, and I know there's a few others joining us from all over the country. I know Anita just had another comment here about, so what are your feelings or understanding of those police officers who protest by sticks out? And what would be your recommendation to those police officers who get it and have to work with those that don't get it?
Call them into a conversation and helping them understand, and create relationship. Everything to me, in my experience, has been rooted and based in relationship, and encourage them to get to know the members of that community. It's hard to hate me up close, and if you can humanize someone, then you're less inclined to treat them with such malice and contempt.
So Andrea just mentioned, and I forgot to mention this, is that PRSA has a Pride event happening tomorrow, so you can actually look in the chat and get the link for that. And let's see, shout out from the Chicago chapter too. So thank you for joining us today. Tru, I think people want to probably get a hold of you for potential future speaking engagements. Would you like to give out your contact info?
Sure, I can be reached via email at truaccess1@gmail.com. That's TRUACCESS and the number 1@gmail.com. You can get in touch with me via Twitter or Instagram. It's at Tru Access, TRUACCESS. LinkedIn, it's Tru Pettigrew. Facebook, it's Tru Pettigrew. Website, tru-access.com, tru-access.com.
So Tru is open to giving presentations and sessions at corporations and keynote speeches around the country. So if you feel like your company would benefit from hiring him, please give Tru a call. And there was a quick question, what's your book? And Millennials Revealed, do you want to give a quick plug on that and what it's about?
Yeah, Millennials Revealed is a book that really serves as a guide to help organizations and individuals understand how to bridge generation gaps and work seamlessly across the different generations.
So again, Tru, I want to say thank you for joining us today and helping us start the conversation. I know this is a conversation that's going to go on for a while to come, and hopefully there'll become more equity within the community and all of us bringing our own, I guess, abilities to learn and understand one another. And again, people are saying great seminar. I've gotten several texts from people that just say thank you. This was really eye-opening and supportive. So thanks again for joining us, and we hope that you'll join us next week for our next webinar.
No, thank you for having me, Chris, and thank you all for allowing me to share.